The roar of the crowd had a pulse of its own, a steady rhythm of anticipation and disbelief. This wasn't just another fight. It was the kind of matchup that only existed in fantasy, a collision of eras, styles, and raw power that defied logic. The baddest man on the planet versus the knockout king. Mike Tyson, the most feared boxer to ever step into the ring, against Derrick Lewis, the UFC's record holder for most finishes in the heavyweight division. The mere thought of it sent chills down the spines of fight fans everywhere. It wasn't just a battle of fists. It was a test of legacies, of what it truly meant to be a fighter. And as the first bell loomed, no one knew what was about to unfold. Tyson stood in his corner, his expression carved from stone. At 58, he had no business looking this sharp. Yet there he was, a predator, muscles coiled tight, his footwork still sharp, the same energy that once made grown men crumble in seconds. The doubts had been loud when this fight was announced. Too old, too small, too removed from his prime. But Mike Tyson had never cared about opinions. He only cared about destruction. And he had come here to prove that power, real power, never fades. Across from him, Derrick Lewis bounced on his feet, his face a mask of calm. He had fought giants, thrown bombs with the heaviest hitters in MMA. He had walked through fire before, felt the kind of shots that would put most men in a coma, and still found ways to put them to sleep. His hands carried a different kind of violence, wild, unpredictable, devastating. But this wasn't MMA. No takedowns. No clinches against the cage. Just a boxing ring, 2 sets of gloves, and an opponent unlike anyone he had ever faced. The rules had been debated for weeks. This wasn't a full boxing match with 12 rounds of patience and technicality. It was stripped-down warfare, 5 rounds, 2-minute bursts of brutality, no feeling-out process. A spectacle, pure and simple. But beneath the showmanship, beneath the hype, both men knew what this really was, a challenge. A chance to prove something, not to the world, but to themselves. The crowd barely had time to settle before the ring announcer's voice echoed through the arena, stretching out their names like a slow-burning fuse. The tension climbed with every syllable. Tyson rolled his shoulders, eyes locked forward. Lewis exhaled, shifting his weight, ready to unleash. Then the referee stepped in. One final look at both men. One final command. Let's fight! And then it happened. Tyson was a blur, launching forward with a ferocity that defied his age, his body twisting with that signature peek-a-boo movement, slipping inside as if he were still in his prime. The crowd roared as his right hand cocked back, a missile aimed for destruction. But Derrick Lewis didn't flinch. He had seen knockout artists before. He had felt power that could shut the lights off in an instant. And as Tyson came in, he reacted on instinct, a counter primed, an answer already loaded in his massive right hand. 2 legends. 2 forces of nature. And in the span of a single heartbeat, fists were flying, legacies colliding, and the world watching, breath held, waiting for the first to fall. Tyson's fist cut through the space between them, a flash of muscle and intent, but Derrick Lewis wasn't there to catch it. He had slipped just enough, a fraction of an inch, letting the punch graze past his guard. The power was real. He could feel it in the air, in the way the force of the swing seemed to shake reality itself. But Lewis had been here before. He knew what it meant to stand in the fire, and he had no intention of backing down. Then came his answer, a short, brutal counter. The kind of right hand that had made giants crumble, that had left opponents staring at the lights before they even realized what had happened. It wasn't the wild, looping bomb that he often threw in the cage. It was tighter, sharper, a lesson in controlled destruction. He felt it connect clean against Tyson's guard, a heavy impact that sent a ripple through the legend's frame. But Tyson didn't stagger. He didn't blink. He just grinned. The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in awe. Tyson wasn't just here to fight. He was here to remind the world who he was. He rolled his shoulders, reset his stance, and then came forward again, faster this time, cutting off the ring with the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime making opponents disappear in under a minute. Lewis could feel the shift. This wasn't just about power. Tyson was hunting now. A jab, then another. The movement was almost hypnotic, the way Tyson weaved through the space between them, a rhythm older than time itself. Then, without warning, he exploded. A left hook, pure violence wrapped in technique, smashed against Lewis's ribs, folding him slightly to the side. And in that moment, Tyson saw it. The opening. The angle he had spent decades perfecting. The uppercut came like lightning, an old, familiar weapon honed through years of wreckage. If it landed clean, it was over. Tyson knew it. The crowd knew it. Even Lewis, for a brief second, knew it. But something strange happened. Instead of pulling away, instead of shelling up, Lewis did something no one expected. He reached forward, absorbed the shot with his arms, and wrapped Tyson up. It wasn't a full clinch, nothing illegal, but just enough to smother the punch, to take the steam out of it. And then, with pure brute strength, he shoved Tyson back. The force sent the former champion stumbling a step, just enough to disrupt the flow of his attack. It wasn't skill. It wasn't technique. It was sheer raw power. Tyson steadied himself, eyes narrowing, his grin fading into something colder. Lewis cracked his neck, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the impact. And just like that, something shifted. This wasn't going to be a quick war. This wasn't going to be another highlight reel finish. This was turning into something else entirely. For the first time, Tyson had found a man who could take his best and shove him back. And for the first time, Lewis had found an opponent who wouldn't fold under his power. Both men knew it now. This wasn't just a fight. It was survival. A shift ran through the arena, something deeper than just the sound of fists colliding. The energy had changed. This was no longer about a single punch, no longer about who would land first. This was something primal, a fight that had stripped away the spectacle and left behind nothing but raw will. Tyson, a man who had spent his life overwhelming opponents with ferocity, now faced someone who refused to break. And Lewis, a fighter who had built his reputation on sheer power, now stood against a force of nature that had been defying time itself. Tyson moved first, a sharp step forward, his left hand flicking out a feint. Lewis didn't bite. He was learning now, adapting, reading the patterns that had made Tyson a legend. But learning wasn't enough, not against a man who had spent his youth ending fights before they could even begin. The next punch was real, a right hook thrown with bad intentions, and it found its mark. Lewis's head snapped to the side, sweat spraying under the lights. But he didn't go down. Instead, he did something that no one in the building expected. He laughed. It wasn't the kind of forced grin fighters used to hide the pain. It was real, deep, a sound that echoed through the ring. He wiped his mouth, nodded once, then stepped back in with his own shot. The punch came from nowhere short, brutal, and perfectly timed. Tyson had been in wars before, had taken shots from men twice his size, but this one was different. It wasn't just power. It was everything behind it. Lewis had been holding back, waiting, biding his time. And now, he had found his moment. Tyson staggered, his legs betraying him for just a fraction of a second. It wasn't a knockdown, but the crowd saw it. Everyone saw it. For the first time in this fight, Mike Tyson looked human. Lewis pressed forward, smelling blood, but Tyson wasn't done. With the instincts of a man who had spent a lifetime living in chaos, he pivoted, rolling off the ropes, creating just enough space to fire back. The uppercut came again, the same weapon that had ended so many nights early, and it landed clean. Lewis's head snapped back. His arms dropped for the briefest moment. And then something unbelievable happened. He didn't fall. He shook it off like it was nothing more than a shove, eyes locked onto Tyson, breathing heavy but still standing. A silence hung in the air. The kind of silence that only happens when something impossible has just unfolded. Tyson exhaled, eyes narrowing. He understood now. This man, this fighter standing across from him, wasn't like the others. He wasn't here to be another name on a list. He was here for something more. And so, Tyson did something he hadn't done in years. He stepped back, lowered his gloves just slightly, and nodded. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't defeat. It was respect. The final seconds of the round ticked away, the bell cutting through the tension like a blade. The fight was over. There would be no knockout, no final highlight to replay endlessly. Instead, there was something greater, two men standing, two warriors who had given everything, who had faced down the storm and refused to fall. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or just sit in stunned silence. But then, slowly, the applause came. Not for a winner. Not for a loser. But for a moment that would never be forgotten. Tyson and Lewis met in the center of the ring, breathing heavy, sweat dripping. No words were needed. Some fights don't need an ending. Some fights just need to be remembered.